Today we're taking a look at the GT 1030. We've talked about this little GPU before on this channel, but this time we're being a little bit more ambitious by testing it at 1440p. Now, the GT 1030 is about as basic as it gets. It's a low-end graphics card that launched way back in May of 2017. With whopping 2GB VRAM, it's truly cutting edge, and it's designed to sip power while handling the absolute basic of tasks, like watching videos or maybe some very light gaming. To keep things completely fair, and by fair I mean wildly unbalanced, we're pairing it with an i9-13900K, a Z790 motherboard, and 64GB of DDR5 RAM. So, everything in this system is insanely fast, except for the one component that actually matters. The GT 1030 technically supports up to 8K resolution, which sounds impressive until you realise that's basically just for video playback. Gaming at 8K on this, well, good luck with that. It also uses just 30 watts of power, meaning no extra cables needed. So, if you're building a tiny office PC, or a budget system where expectations are apparently low, well, it actually makes a lot of sense. First up, we've got Resident Evil Requiem, with everything turned down to as low as possible. Depth of field and motion blur are off, and AMD FSR is set to ultra performance mode, meaning the game is being upscaled from 720p internal resolution. So, this is where things start to fall apart. I pushed the 1030 straight into the deep end to show what happens when you try run modern games at 1440p. Once the VRAM is exhausted, everything crumbles. The game turns into a slideshow and it becomes completely unplayable. The GT 1030 is an entry-level graphics card with a 64-bit memory bus, which heavily limits its performance compared to more powerful GPUs. It's mainly intended for 1080p gaming at low settings, or even lower resolutions than that. While it can technically support higher resolutions, such as 1440p, it's not very capable at handling them very well at all. In gaming, these limitations quickly become clear. Many modern titles already struggle to run smoothly at 1080p on this card. So pushing it to 1440p only makes things worse. As a result, the GT 1030 isn't a good choice for newer games. So the 2GB on the 1030 does absolutely nothing. In Resident Evil Requiem, you're only getting 14 FPS on average, with a 1% low at 9 and a 0.1% low at 5 FPS. Next up is Mafia 2 Definitive Edition at low settings with FXAA enabled. At 1440p, the GT 1030 can handle some lighter games, but it really depends on which version of the card you've actually got. There are two variants, one with GDR5 memory and the other with much slower DDR4. Today we're using the GDR5 version, as the DDR4 model struggles significantly more. So, you'd likely need to drop those settings even further just to get playable frame rates. And when it comes to newer titles, both versions start to hit their limits at 1440p. So, overall, if you're using a GT 1030 at this resolution, it's best suited for older games, esports titles, or anything lightweight. And if you've got the GDDR5 version, you'll definitely get the better experience. In Mafia Definitive Edition, performance averages 31 FPS, with 1% low of 19 and a 0.1% low at 13 FPS. Next up is Hollow Knight Silksong on high settings. The GT 1030 actually has a really nice little use, and that's indie games. When it comes to the lighter stuff, it really does well. A good example is something like Hollow Knight. These kinds of games use simple 2D visuals, so they don't really need a powerful graphics card. On the GT 1030, especially the GDDR5 version, you can actually get away with smooth gameplay even at 1440p, and it feels pretty great to play. But it's just not the one game. Titles like Celeste, Dead Cells, and Stardew Valley all run perfectly fine on this card. So while the GT 1030 isn't great for big, demanding games, it's actually really solid for indie games. For a budget setup or a basic PC, it's still a simple, low-power way to enjoy loads of great games. Performance-wise in Hollow Knight, Silksong, it's pretty solid. The game averages 71 FPS with a 1% low of 49 and a 0.1% low of 41 FPS. Moving on to Grand Theft Auto 5, Legacy Edition running on normal settings, with motion blur turned off and FXAA enabled. The GT 1030 is often overlooked as a gaming GPU, but it actually has a strong use case for as part of a media server. Thanks to its low power draw, it's well suited for systems that need to run quietly and continuously. One of its biggest strengths is hardware video decoding and encoding. With all the Nvidia codec support, the GT 1030 can handle video transcoding tasks really well, especially for something like Plex. So for a basic media server, it's a simple, practical option that just gets the job done. In gaming, GTA 5 runs at a 53 FPS on average, with 1% lows at 38 and 0.1% lows dropping to 24 FPS. The next game is Fortnite on low settings with motion blur and FXAA enabled. I also tried DX12 on normal settings, but that only reached around 30 FPS. So I switched it to performance rendering mode. The GT 1030 might be low end, but when it comes to esports games, it actually does a pretty solid job. Games like Counter-Strike 2, Valorant and League of Legends are all designed to run on a wide range of low-end hardware. At the end of the day, the GT 1030 isn't trying to compete with modern graphics cards, but for esports games, it does just fine. In Fortnite, performance is acceptable, but definitely not perfect. And remember, this card only has 2GB of VRAM, and we're running the game at 1440p, so honestly the results are pretty disappointing. The game averages 38 FPS, with a 1% low of 22 and a 0.1% low of 19 FPS. The last game is Battlefield 1, running on low settings with motion blur turned off. This 2016 game delivers an average of 42 FPS, with a 1% low of 30 and a 0.1% low of 19 FPS. So, after testing the GT 1030 at 1440p across a mixture of games, older titles, esports games and indie games, the results are pretty clear. This is a very low-end graphics card that was never really meant for this kind of thing. In demanding AAA games, the card completely falls apart, with performance dropping into single digits at times. It becomes unplayable, and that's mainly down to its 2GB of VRAM and the 64-bit memory bus. So once you're past that limit, there's just no way for the card to keep up. It quickly turns into a slideshow, which really shows why this GPU isn't suited for any modern games. So yeah, 1440p on a GT 1030 was definitely a huge mistake. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look back at the 1030, then don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm David James and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.